recorded live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the blacksci-fi.com website. My name is William Hayashi. I'm the regular host. There are other hosts. And I'd like to welcome you to the, I got to go look at the calendar, the October 23rd edition. And tonight's special guest is author, I'm guessing probably, I think you're a publisher too, right? Steve Bellinger?
No, only an author. The book was published
only
by
an author. Okay.
Yep.
All right. And believe it or not, up until just a little while ago, I didn't know Steve and I actually live within a couple miles of each other here in Chicago. So I'm guessing you're getting a little bit of sprinkly rain over by you too?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Very excited.
Oh yeah. Let's start with a little bit of background on you, so people kind of get to know you, and then I want to talk about the work that you've done. But are you a Chicago native?
Yes, all my life. I lived in the south suburbs for a while, University Park in Will County, but I'm pretty much a Chicagoan. Pretty much Chicagoan all my life.
And what high school did you go to? Because
I went to Crane High School, which I believe is now closed.
Yeah, we used to play them in football.
Uh-oh. What high school did you go to?
I went to Kenwood.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, okay. I will get you back for that. Anybody who has a nerve to grow up in the suburbs and call himself a Chicagoan, that's just wrong.
No, just 20 years. That's where I raised the kids. I was born and raised in Chicago, lived out there for 20 years, and came back when it was all over. Yeah,
no, I get it. A lot of people complain about the Chicago schools. I was fortunate enough to grow up in the Hyde Park area, so I went to Ray School, then I went to Kenwood. All of the schools there were very, very, very good schools. There was also the University of Chicago's lab school. We used to beat them up because, but anyway, so I hesitate to ask a whole lot of Chicago questions because I know the answers, but I mean, for you being a writer now, and I'm not going to ask how old you are or how long that took or anything like that, but I mean, early on, grammar school, elementary school, high school, did you have a penchant for writing? Did you have a desire? And also, were you an avid reader?
Well, it all started when I was very young. My mom, a single mom, raised us alone with the help of my grandparents. She worked for a printing company, and she worked with the actual printing presses. I mean, she was a collator. I guess she, stacked up the books or whatever.
Sure.
And she would bring books home, overruns or whatever it was, and she would bring a variety just because she herself was an avid reader, and that's where I discovered Isaac Asimov and Heinlein and Clark and those guys.
Man, so you're like me. I grew up mostly in the 60s, and my dad was a science fiction fanatic, and he had the subscription to, I think it was Amazing Tales, and and then when it turned over to be analog. And so, I would get home before him, and if it came in the mail, by the time he got it, I already read it. But that's such a cool way for you, because it sounds like that was a great way to build up a home library.
Oh, yeah, it was great, because she brought all sorts of things home. She didn't know what we liked. That's just what I gravitated to.
And what was the appeal of science fiction for you?
That's an interesting question. It was just fascinating. I mean, it's hard to put my finger on it. I guess the whole idea about. Say again.
Was it the what if factor?
Well, yeah, I was just going to get there. It's the what if factor. It's the whole futuristic idea, and to look out of the window and see the stars and imagine standing on one of them. And I got very much into the iRobot series too, which is another whole thing, because I was very much into technology, and I found that fascinating.
I did too, and I also was into the Foundation series, and I will tell you, the day that the final book of the two series that brought them together when that book came out, I was just so overjoyed at how Asimov bent those two storylines and brought them together. I mean, I thought that was just brilliant. Yeah, I grew up with Asimov, Heinlein, Clark. I mean, too many to mention. I mean,
oh yeah, that was amazing. I mean, that was the golden age of sci-fi. I mean, somewhere here, I've actually got this old, very thick book that I got from somewhere, Isaac Asimov's Science Fiction Treasury, and these are like old classic sci-fi stories, and I will still pick this thing up and read it.
I actually have that. I believe I have the same book.
Okay.
I collected a lot from that period, and I think that it, obviously it influenced me, but it didn't influence me enough because the first thing I wrote was in 2009. So I didn't have the desire to create. You mentioned you read all of the Golden Age and things like that. Did you, at that same time, have the desire to produce something of your own?
Well, yeah, I made my own little comic books, with my crappy artwork, and I would go to the store and buy a 40-page wire-bound notebook and fill everything up with my next novel. In the 60s, I discovered James Bond, and I created my own spy series that I worked on, and nobody read the dumb thing but me. I wish I could find some of them.
Yeah, but I mean, that's quite an undertaking. I mean, how old were you in the 60s?
Well, I'm 64 years old now, so I would have been in my preteens.
Yeah, we're about the same age.
Yeah.
So, and then at that time, we had a growing number of science fiction themed movies that came out. I remember seeing Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Oh yeah.
And I saw it at the Piccadilly on 51st Street.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the very first motion picture that I remember going to.
Well, the first film I saw, my brother took me to see it. It was The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Oh yeah.
I remember that vividly because it scared the hell out of me.
And so when you start seeing these things, did they also start firing your imagination? So many people who are younger than us, they go their big moment was the release of Star Wars.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I think probably back then it might have been the books more than the movies, because most of the movies we went to see were like monster flicks and things like that, and I wasn't too much into that. And of course, we didn't have much money, so we watched a lot of it on television. Years after it came out. And it's hard to say what actually got me started. In the mid '60s when Star Trek came out, that totally turned me around. But because I was also into superheroes, and the comic strip that I put together was a superhero thing. You're asking me to remember stuff that happened an awful long time ago.
Okay, I apologize. No, I apologize.
No. It was not your fault. I'm going senile here while I'm on the phone.
Oh, no, I've got that CRS disease too, and I have a hard time remembering what I did yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Then let's jump ahead to when you did you do any kind of creative writing in high school or after high school? Where did kind of the real volition of writing start with you?
Well, it would have been high school, because I remember, writing poetry and stories. In fact, my first attempt at sci-fi was a class assignment at some point in high school, and I got up and I read it to the class, and some of them didn't get it, and the ones who got it sort of made fun of it because it sounded so much like this or that. The guys who were real sci-fi fanatics like me saw the fault in it. And so I kind of retracted into my cocoon a little bit and just started working on my own. In college, I took a class in science fiction writing, oddly enough, and I wrote a story that people liked very much. But I learned sort of a bitter lesson because I read it to the class and everybody liked it, and the only real criticism they had is that it sounded too much like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is my favorite sci-fi film. And I've learned if I'm going to write, I can't read and watch a lot of stuff at the same time, because if I'm really impressed by it, it'll sneak in there.
Yeah, I had the same kind of experience. I started writing my first book in 2001, and I cut off cable because I had all of the movie channels, and I'm one of those stupid people who, no matter how many times a movie that I want to see comes on a month, I will watch it because I figure I'm paying for it.
Sure.
In some respects, I don't have the sense of a houseplant, but. So, and the other thing about having cable was by getting away from cable and not even having an antenna to get, local news, Saturday Night Live, or things like that, it made it much, much easier for me to write. That was the year I started my first novel, and so I kept myself from those kinds of not only distractions but seductions.
Yeah. I think that's why I tend to want to write things that are different than what we see on TV. I'm a member of a couple of writers groups, and a lot of the sci-fi writers are trying to write their version of Star Wars, their version of Star Trek. I wanted to do something totally different, and I think I may have succeeded with that with the CHRONOCAR. But with the other. I mean, I've been writing short stories for a long time. Back in the 80s, when I was in University Park, we had a science fiction club, and very interesting because it was when that's when I went to my first sci-fi Star Trek convention. I was in my 40s because I met a lady who was 10 years older than I who came to the club meeting with a uniform on, and I thought, you know what, I need to get into this. and we used to have. Every year we would have like an anniversary party that we called we used to call it a galactic feast. We would watch movies and everything, and we would also everybody would bring an unusual dish. Like I had a couple. One was now you're a Trekkie, obviously, right? You've watched Star Trek.
Oh yeah.
Well, I came up with a dish that resembled Ga. The Klingon dish.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
It was black noodles with a lot of extra oil, so it was nice and slimy. Okay. And the thing that everybody loved the most is a Klingon recipe for whole roasted tribble.
Which seems counterintuitive, because don't tribbles automatically hate Klingons?
Right, and Klingons hate tribbles, so what do? You eat them.
So, I guess. Okay, I don't know.
What did they do with all the Klingons that Scotty beamed into their engine room that day?
That's true.
I tell everybody that.
Go ahead.
I tell everybody that I wanted to get the recipe from a Klingon. He said, over my dead body, so I killed him.
We're doing a sci-fi cookbook at BSFS.
Oh, really?
Yes. And James Jones, one of the members there, is kind of, I guess, compiling the recipes. Whether they don't have to necessarily be sci-fi recipes, but definitely, I would definitely put that recipe together and submit it. Because
I certainly will.
It's apropos. I don't know if I would have it around the holidays myself, but I would certainly point people in the right direction.
It was very popular.
Was it really? Did it? It tasted good.
Well, all it really was an olive with a meatball wrapped around it, cooked in spaghetti sauce dyed black.
Oh, all right.
And people loved it. They asked for it every year.
All right, so we apparently now have another recipe to add to the book, so that'll be great.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like you you managed to find, affinity groups, affinity creatives for your sci-fi penchant. What I think as you were going along, and you said you've written a lot of short stories, have a lot of them been published?
Actually, only one. In fact, it goes back to the sci-fi group. One of the members of our group actually worked for a local newspaper. So she was already a professional writer, and she was always encouraging the members of the group to try to write. So one weekend she threw down a challenge to bring a story the next week or bring food. Well, I was up to that challenge, and I made the mistake of asking her if there was a theme. Well, she was having trouble with village inspectors in her home, so she said that the theme was it had to have something to do with inspections and all of that stuff, building code inspections. So
okay.
I wrote a story that was actually published as a standalone short story and is now available free online, and everybody loves it. The story is called A Silly Millimeter, and it's basically about a guy. It's in the near future, and he's being cited by the city because his house is 1 millimeter too big. And he's going to get fined $1,000 a day until he fixes that.
Man, that's good.
And people seem to love that little story. That's the thing that sort of got me to realize that, hey, my stuff is good enough that people will buy it and people will publish it.
And about what year was that?
2000. Well, I mean, I wrote it like in the mid 90s. It was like 2005 when I sent it into a writer's magazine in a contest, and it won honorable mention and got printed. And
nice.
Well, the funny thing about it is that it has a lot of foul language. That's part of the humor of it. And it turned out that the magazine, they said, well, we're a family magazine, so they cut out all of the swear words, and it wasn't nearly as funny anymore. But I found a publisher who, they were doing single short stories as ebooks and selling them for 99 cents. But the concept didn't work, so it didn't really sell. So Piker Press, if you go to pikerpress.com, you can read the story for free.
I'm going to do that, and I'll put the link up in the chat room for everybody.
And actually, I'm part of a writers group, and we're putting together our own anthology, and it may become part of that anthology with some other short stories that I've written.
That'll be nice. Hey, does your writers group want any new members?
Well, there's a group that I'm with actually that is looking for members. They're out in Oak Park. And these are novelists. And these are some of the people that have helped me put together what's going to be my next novel. And
wow.
And again, I think we are looking for members. So if you're interested in joining a novelist group.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later. I mean,
sure,
my group disbanded because one person almost died, one person moved away, and, so I haven't been in a group like that lately. And the stimulation from a group like that is
absolutely.
something that people who may be just starting out don't understand. But it's really crucial, and not in terms of so much critique, but just finding out how people do the things that they do, and what kinds of things to avoid. Now, I'm wondering if that story that you wrote would have been great in a magazine, like a home improvement magazine or something like that, where you've got people where you've got people who go through that kind of stuff all the time. I think the concept was brilliant, and I'm definitely going to check it out as soon as we're off the air. Okay, so you've got a good, nurturing bunch of people around you, and the thing that Jarvis put on our announcement poster is called, what is it, the CHRONOCAR?
Yeah, the CHRONOCAR.
Okay, I did pronounce it right. And is this a novel?
It is.
Novel?
It is a novel,
okay,
something that I've been working on for 5 or 6 years. Easily a year's worth of research, because it's a time travel story. So the history is somewhat accurate. I mean, it's fictionalized, but the things that happen are based on fact. Now, the way the whole thing got started, back about the time that I wrote A Silly Millimeter, I decided I was going to write the Great American Science Fiction novel. And, and of course, I messed around with that for a long time. I mean, I was going to write the next Star Wars until I realized that's not what I was interested in. And because what I really like is hard science fiction, believable science fiction. Now, I enjoy Star Wars, I enjoy Star Trek, but I also like the kind of things that happen to an ordinary person. Movies about things like epidemics scare the heck out of me because they're possible. One of the comments I got about the CHRONOCAR is the fact that it's about sort of a person who comes up with a time machine who is not a genius scientist, part of some big secret government thing, just an ordinary person. The guy is actually an IIT student, and he discovers the plans for the CHRONOCAR that was developed a long time before, and goes back to getting in a lot of trouble. And the main character, Tony Carpenter, is basically me. I was an IIT student, and this is pretty much what I would have done if I hadn't gotten my hands on something like this, which means I would have gotten myself in a hell of a lot of trouble.
Yeah, but everyman stories are very popular because people can relate to them.
Exactly.
How many people can really relate to being, Superman, or having lived on Krypton, or exposed to radiation and, suddenly have powers? I think everyman stories, their popularity is based upon people's imagination.
Well, I can relate to being Superman, but that's another story.
Can you? Yeah, but you're black. You can't be that. Everybody on the internet will start bitching, crying, moaning, and being upset because we have. I'm just kidding. I'll be part of the Green Lantern Corps. I'll figure something out. All right, as long as you don't turn yellow. Wasn't that the bad thing that happened at the end of that movie, where that guy and they thought they were going to have a sequel, and they didn't get the sequel?
Yeah, they made a few mistakes with that, I think. But anyway.
Yeah. But no, I like everyman stories because because of the plausible nature. I mean, that's my work. It talks about people, and when people read my books, they meet people who they know, or people they could have known, or people who are just like them. Because I just did a blog post someplace, and I don't remember where it was, but I lamented the fact that in science fiction movies, you always have to have such psychically and psychologically damaged people to try to move the story along, and I resented that. It's, first of all, it's easy, cheap, low weight writing, and I don't have much respect for that, and I know that's snobbish, but you know what? I fully admit to being an elitist snob. But the fact of the matter is, most people are not that crazy. They're just not that crazy. They're like, and the other thing that I resented was the fact that there were no black people like me. I'm biracial, but there are no middle class black people out there in any of these stories.
Exactly.
They don't exist. And my favorite gripe about that was all of the brouhaha when the last Cosby Show came out, and people said, oh, we have a black doctor who married a black lawyer who had teenage kids with white problems. That's just not realistic. And those are people I grew up, especially in Hyde Park.
My next door neighbors, yeah.
Yeah, and so my writing was in response to that, and it kind of like to repudiate the meme that these people don't exist. So I like the idea that you had regular, normal, how you described it, an average person having this device. And what was it that drew you to kind of the time travel genre?
Well, that's an interesting story because, I've always liked time travel stories. But there was a weird thing that sort of triggered it. I had a friend that I went to school with, very nice guy, very eccentric. And, a few years ago, I ran into him again after not seeing him for many years. We just sort of passed on the street. And,
sure.
We stopped and said hello. And I think one of us had just changed jobs or something, because it got to the point where about twice a month I'd run into him on the same street while going wherever I was going.
Mm-hmm,
Well,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes we would sit and have coffee. Other times we would just say hi. But one day he came to me, stopped me on the street, gave me the strangest look, said, "Steve, I've discovered the secret of time travel." And to myself, I said, "Okay, right." And that's fine. We, said goodbye. I didn't see him for 3 months. And the thought, of course, I did see him later, and he had forgotten all of that. But then the thought hit me: what if someone like that had discovered the secret? What if an ordinary person, what would that mean for the rest of us?
Right.
Someone who doesn't know all the answers, messing around in time. And of course, I wanted to give it the African American edge, because that's a different experience. The main character is a middle class African American man, but then he goes back to the year 1919 when Chicago had its bloodiest race riot, and he's exposed to a level of racism and things that he never knew existed.
Right.
And he's forced to deal with it. So it's kind of an eye opener for some people. And the thing you were saying about how people identify with every man's stories, I've discovered that people who say they don't like science fiction absolutely love my story. That sort of blew my mind, because I thought I was writing hard sci-fi, but people are really getting into it. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
Well,
please finish.
Well, I'm thinking it's because people don't know what science fiction really is.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. They think it's the Avengers. They think it's Star Wars. But, I mean, some of that is science fiction. Some of it, happens in space and whatever. But that's not what defines the genre. And that's what surprises people. In fact, I've actually stopped pushing it so much as sci-fi. I'm calling it an urban adventure in time. So I don't, because the sci-fi identifier was scaring people away. Yeah.
And people don't know that Jurassic Park is science fiction.
Exactly. They don't realize that Soylent Green was science fiction.
Right.
Or Contagion and things like that. Sure.
Well, and I think that goes back to, about 2 or 3 generations ago, our culture got into the habit. The meme for for American culture was to be able to classify things simply with 1 or 2 words. And people have, in a certain way, their tendency has been to be kind of dumbed down, because there's not that critical thinking, and we're not talking about critical thinking like Socrates or Stephen Hawking, just the critical thinking about, Steve's story is science fiction. No, it's a time travel story. So it's not science fiction. Okay, I get it now. And please excuse me for saying this, because my people. But when I say the elevator pitch for my trilogy, for the Dark Side trilogy, here's the elevator pitch. It is the Dark Side trilogy tells the story of what happens in America when the country finds out that black folks have been secretly living on the backside of the moon since before Neil Armstrong got there. And I will tell you right now, 50% of everybody I say that to, their immediate next question is this a true story? I I don't want my own head to explode. I'm really fond of meat, but sometimes, and you have to wonder, okay, so why is that? Why would they ask me that? And if you start to question them, then they get defensive, and then you lose everything. So, but every time I say that, I do the pitch, and I hear that question,
Maybe you should just answer yes. It's funny. There's a lot of that stuff on Facebook. You know,
Right.
I remember the thing about, you know, Mars is going to be closer than it ever has. It's going to be as big as the moon, and people are waiting for that to happen. And I'm saying if Mars ever gets that big, I'm kissing my backside goodbye, because that's the end of everything.
It is. It really is.
But whatever you put online, people will believe it. And I think that's part of the problem with the sci-fi genre, because you tune in sci-fi, the Sci-Fi Channel, and they're running a horror movie. Oh, that must be sci-fi. Professional wrestling. Oh, I guess that's sci-fi too.
Dude, for 50 years, the horror and fantasy has been buried in the sci-fi stacks of every single bookstore in America, except the independent bookstores, where you have a little more forethought and generally a little better consideration about how they classify the books. So, yeah, no, I mean, and the Sci-Fi Channel, you know, it's run by stupid suits. Okay, they're not very bright suits, because the crap that they put on, I mean, it's embarrassing, you know. And
I mean, you couldn't appreciate Sharknado? I mean,
oh man, you just took the words right out of my mouth. 3 of those things, and stars, A-list stars, are fighting to be in that movie. But I understand why they're fighting to be in it, because it's camp, and because there's visibility, and they know that every knucklehead in America is going to watch that movie. But you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, and even if you looked at that as maybe, I mean, it's more fantasy than science fiction. But you know, you could make, you know, some half-ass argument for classifying that as sci-fi. But yeah, and you know what? I do worry about the ubiquity of the dumbing down of America, because you have 48% of the people in this country who have no idea what climate change is all about, and they don't understand it. I have something that you know, that I repeat, and I think people get sick of it. But you know, if you look at the bell-shaped curve of IQ distribution, just a hair under half of the people in America, or actually in the whole world, are of subnormal IQ. And so when that's your audience, and when your audience is conditioned to spoon-fed crap-ass movies that are called science fiction, it's kind of tough to get something cerebral or something with a little more consideration out there. You know, we're told when we write novels to write them at between the 3rd and the 6th grade level.
Right.
For sci-fi. And I, you know, that blows my mind. But then when you go and you read a Star Trek book, or you read a Star Wars book, you know, something that people have written out of those genres and fan fiction, you know, it makes me want to go home and go to bed, you know? Well,
I tell you, that's true, and I realize that. And for that reason, I did not expect my book to do very well.
Right.
But people are loving it. I mean, because one of the things that I did that I haven't seen anywhere else is that I dealt with, fictionally, the actual science of time travel, what the actual mechanism might be. And I thought that people would be bored by that, but I guess there's enough of a story wrapped around it that they got into it. I mean, so many people who tell me they hate sci-fi. There's a friend of mine at work. I'm sitting in his office, and he was telling me how he bought the book. He was trying to support me, but, you know, this is really great. And then later that day, I'm working. He's on a train heading home, and I get this email from him. Holy crap, I can't believe this. And he wrote me one of the best reviews on Amazon. And the man says he hates science fiction. He doesn't know what it is.
Yeah, well, and so, you know, guys like you and I, we're gonna sneak that past people's perception filters. You know,
you just can't tell them it's sci-fi up front.
No, you can't. You know, when people ask me, they say, "What is?" I go, "Well, it's a love story. It's drama. It's speculative fiction, and it deals with going to the moon." And they go, "Oh," and you know, I don't want to go any further than that. You know, for the longest time, I got angry when people, the online world, classified my first book as science fiction instead of speculative fiction, because I knew about people's filter. So, you know, I think it makes sense for you to kind of couch yours as an urban story. And actually, there was another story. I can't remember who it was by, but it was about a guy, 2 men, black one and white one, and they chased each other back to the Civil War.
Okay.
And I think the white guy was going to help the Confederacy win or whatever. But, you know, it wasn't, they didn't talk about it being science fiction at all. You know, there was nothing
right.
in the literature or anything. And I think it was because of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, do people, I mean, are we going to have to keep doing this? It appears that the pendulum is swinging backward, because hard copy books are actually being purchased a little bit more than electronic books this year. It started out that way at the beginning of 2014, and then I forgot to keep track of that. But the other thing that we have going for these kinds of stories is, if they're good stories, you know, eventually there's going to be another Twilight Zone or an Outer Limits,
Yes.
because
Yes.
and so stories like these are going to be fodder for that. And one of the things that I like about what's happening now is the attention that at least the term Afrofuturism is generating.
Mm-hmm.
And there's imagination there that does not exist in mainstream American literature. And so if people are going to be looking for new things, not necessarily black things, because, you know, they can take a black theme and turn it white or whatever.
Oh, sure.
But if the stories are there, I think that people like you and I may actually see a resurgence before we blessedly pass along. But we may see a resurgence of that. And there's even, I'm noticing in schools, in some schools, there's a much bigger emphasis on regular casual reading. Let me ask you this: you've got a couple people who gave you really good reviews. What, you know, generally, what is the response that you've gotten for the short story, and then also for your novel, for the you know?
Well, for the short story, a lot of people find it very humorous, you know, and they can sort of identify with it, because part of what inspired that, again, I'm living in University Park, and I step out of my front door, and there's a guy with a ruler measuring my grass, you know.
Yeah. Measuring how tall it is?
How tall it is, to make sure it's within regulation.
Oh, no.
This is after I complained about the grass being too tall in the accessway in the back. I mean, so that was probably the last straw that set me down to start writing it. And people enjoyed the humor of it. The most common thing I get about, well, there are two things I get, and this is really interesting. The people who are into sci-fi say it's the kind of sci-fi they like. Someone from the Black Science Fiction Society said it was the most innovative take on time travel he had ever read. And then people who are not into sci-fi really get into the history and the drama, and they just really enjoy it. So it's coming from several directions. And again, I didn't have that in mind. I just wanted to put together a good story, and I guess maybe I succeeded. But it is pretty amazing, the response I'm getting. Yeah.
And talk a little bit about the research, because first of all, you said you like to write hard sci-fi. I love writing hard sci-fi because it's more practical, and I think it's more understandable when you talk about, you know, maybe current science and how you're taking current science and using it with a simple speculative element. You know, like Jurassic Park. You know, finding the DNA of dinosaurs and then resurrecting the dinosaurs. Although I think it would be funny as hell to have a Tyrannosaurus Rex running around San Diego. But that's just me and my wicked sense of humor. Oh, man, come on, man. Or here in Chicago, can you imagine, let's say they had a Tyrannosaurus Rex at Brookfield Zoo, and that thing got away. Would that not be the funniest damn thing that you would, I mean, being a sci-fi writer, I'm telling you, the possibilities for that are endless. But see, it's just one speculative element, and that's recovering DNA from dinosaurs.
You know, you say that the building I live in has a deck that overlooks Lincoln Park and Lincoln Park Zoo, and I'm getting the image of the head of a T-Rex bouncing among the trees, and every now and then dipping down and coming up with an ibex or something in his mouth. You know,
or running up on the Cardinal's house over there.
Exactly.
Yeah, pray this away. No, but I mean, but
shame on you. But go ahead.
Well, I'm an ordained minister. I'm entitled because
Okay.
I'm tight with God. That's what they say.
Okay.
But
Remind me to tell you a
deal.
story about that. But go ahead.
Seriously, is it something that you've written or that you're thinking about writing?
Well, two things about it. Last weekend, I had my official book release.
Okay.
And it was sponsored by my church.
That's pretty cool.
I go to the South Street Church on the Gold Coast, and it was their idea, and they wanted to support me. They all read it and loved it. I darn near sold out of books. It was amazing. The other thing is that I snuck a little bit of God in the CHRONOCAR, and I think people may not even realize it.
Okay.
The story starts with the son of a slave who is born a genius, and he stumbles upon a copy of Isaac Newton's Principia. So he's reading that and he's learning from it. And in the story, there are quotes from the Principia as he's thinking about it. And the very last quote is Isaac Newton talking about the universe and the dominion of one. There is so much of this God versus science when the original scientists believed in God from the beginning. I think it was Galileo who said that the Bible tells you how to get to heaven, but science tells you how the heavens work. And
but look what they did to him.
Well, this is my point, and we've gotten totally disconnected from that. The story I wanted to tell you, I used to take a little time off from work and go and talk to kids in school about science and science fiction to try to get them to understand the difference between the two. Well, I was at one school, and I should have known better because it was a faith-based school. I'm talking about, orbital satellites and everything, and this fourth grader, cute little girl, stands up and says, "Excuse me, sir, do you believe in God?" "Yeah, sure I do." And I turn back to the board. No, wait a minute. If you believe in God, how can you believe all of this science stuff? Okay, I'm figuring the teacher's going to save me, but I turn and look at her, and she's going, "Yeah, I'm waiting for an answer." So you'll appreciate this as a minister, I think. I went to the board, had no idea what I was going to do. I drew two boxes on the board. Under one, I wrote the Bible. The other, I wrote science book. And I said that the science book tells you what and how, and the Bible tells you who and why, and you need them both. I'm flabbergasted with where this came from. The teacher darn near passed out with that answer, and the little girl goes, "Okay, thank you."
Well, I mean, first of all, kids have more malleable brains, and they're not.
They don't have prejudice.
No, I was about to get political, but I don't want to get political. I really don't. No, because politics angers me.
Oh, sure,
because
sure.
But that was perfect. I mean, and that's probably something that the little kid is going to remember. Even though the teacher was probably proselytizing against you the moment you left the room. Now, don't you listen to that bad man. He's going to hell.
Well, I will tell you, I would love to have been a fly on the wall at that kid's house that night over the dinner table.
Yeah, no doubt. That would have been something.
Yeah.
So what'd you do in school today? Well, we had a man come in and tell you, and what'd you learn? And that would have been the conversation that you would have wanted to hear.
It would have been very interesting.
I've stayed away from religion because I don't, I've talked to guys out at Batavia, at what's the big lab, Fermi Labs out there. They had a book group, a book club out there, and they all read Discovery, and so they asked me out. Okay. And a lot, and we talked about that particular subject. Well, how does God fit into science? And I go, well, if you believe that God is the creator of the universe, then you have to assume that God has put together the universe according to what rules he thinks should rule the universe from a physical perspective.
Sure. I
said, if you don't believe in God, and you're more likely to believe in strictly the science of how the Big Bang and things like that and how we got here, then you're probably more likely to believe that man invented God instead of the other way around. And so we had a extra 2-hour discussion about that, because when you talk to scientists, they really have an insatiable curiosity to know. And the better scientists don't sign off on anything just out of rote.
Exactly.
When I was in school, to get my DD, I readily told them I was an empiricist. And the existence of God was a question to me until I had, absolute proof. And they said, well, what about the flowers? What about the trees? What about us? Aren't they proof? And I go, well, Darwin. And then they didn't like me very much mentioning Darwin. But but I think that they can coexist, and they have coexisted. And it sounds like the story you wrote, blended them just fine. A lot of people go one way or the other, and then when you talk about fantasy, and horror, it can get sticky if you try to embed religion in your story, because not only does it have to be consistent, but there's got to be a basis for why the people act the way they do and why they believe it. So I think it's good, because it can give you some good elements to really embed in a story.
I think it also adds to the realism, because faith or lack of faith is part of everybody's life, just like anything else.
Right.
So, how can you deal with any individual without dealing with that aspect of their life?
Yeah, that's true. Now, is CHRONOCAR your first novel, by the way?
It's my first published novel, yeah. I've written other things that are not worth the paper they were typed on, But it's
Why
my
do you
first
believe
novel.
that?
Oh, well, my first novel I wrote in conjunction with a non-writer, and it was
okay.
And I looked at it years later, and I realized not only why it was rejected, but I was embarrassed that I even sent the thing in. And it wasn't even science fiction. It was a whole different. It was supposed to be a semi-expose kind of thing. It's a whole different issue. But you go through life thinking, oh, this will never happen. It's a 1 in a million, blah blah blah. And I even thought that about the CHRONOCAR, but I thought, well, I'm going to give it a shot. And And what happened was, Barking Rain Press is actually a nonprofit publisher that specializes in first-time writers and writers that aren't normally recognized. Okay. And in a way, I got a little lucky because I'm their first real science fiction piece, and I'm also their first black writer. So I kind of had it in a little bit. And as it turned out, the story was actually pretty good.
Uh-huh.
And it's doing well.
Yeah. And so do you have other novels that are kind of in the hopper getting ready to come forth in the future?
Well, I've got one that I'm hoping to submit in the next month or two. It's it's a paranormal love story, but it does have some sci-fi aspects to it. And for NaNoWriMo next month, I'm hoping to outline yet the third one, which would be very hard sci-fi, I think. So
are you more drawn to the hard sci-fi, with the science bent? I mean, the CHRONOCAR is, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that and also, the other story is basically it's the thing I'm going to write in November is based on a short story that I wrote that never got published, but I've been polishing it, and that story is actually entitled Earworm, and it's about an earworm. It's about an earworm that takes over the world. Someone writes a song that happens to have just the right beat and timbre, and it gets into everybody's minds. And I want to expand that to something bigger, and that's what I'm working on. Okay.
I actually read a story about that, and but it was about 20, 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to see if I can resurrect where I found it, because it was
great.
similar. Because I think this earworm was so irresistible, it did something to the world.
Right. And which is, and this goes. Yeah, I hate giving stuff away, but it gets kind of deep. And
no, yeah, I don't want you to expose the whole thing, but I mean, it's just cool to know that you're still writing and you're still going to be producing, things and still have great ideas. I don't know And let's talk about the age aspect. You know, you're a few years older than I am.
I'm a few years older than most people.
Well, so now you're bragging. You know, I just turned 60 Sunday. So
I work with a young man who celebrated his birthday last week.
Right.
He is almost exactly 1/3 my age.
Yeah,
but
I know how that is.
I'm proud of it.
No, but I mean, it's kind of cool. You know, like I said, I wrote my first novel in 2001. What was I? I was in my mid-40s or so then.
Sure.
And wow, you know, I've got 5 more books in me.
Sure.
You know, that I've got planned, and I don't see any. I think I'm better, obviously, as a storyteller now than I could have been 20, 25, 35 years ago.
Well, you know, my problem was because I was into a very creative bent back in the late 70s. Very few people realized I actually did original radio drama back then. And but then I got married, raising a kid, and, you know, being the executive house, you know, provider and everything, and that kind of short-circuited all of that. It wasn't until all of that ended and I actually got married a second time that I got back into my career. In fact, what literally happened is that I had been playing around with the story, and my wife, Donna, found the first draft of it, read it, came to me with tears in her eyes saying, if you don't finish this and send it in, I'm going to divorce you. So
that is so cool.
I thought about that for about 30 seconds, and then I sat down and started working on it again.
Oh, man, that's great. The last woman I was dating full-time actually took longer to read my novel than it took me to write it. So, you know, that was like the handwriting on the wall there. But I mean, it's also good to have that kind of reinforcement right there, you know?
Oh, yeah, she's great. And she's a business coach and marketing expert, so she's the one that taught me to have a pipeline. I mean, this story is done. Make sure you got another one ready in the wings for when this one is done, so you have a constant, you know. And she's taught me things about how to market it and things of that nature. So it's a good relationship.
Can we talk a little bit about your process, your writing process?
I don't think I have one. I write when I feel like it. I write when I feel like it. That's why it takes so long. You know, I'll sit in front of the computer and I'll stare at it. Nothing will happen. Then I'll dream something the night before, and then I'll write like mad the next day. You know, most of the stories that I write, I come up with the ending first and try to figure out how to get there.
Oh, that's exactly my process.
Oh, yeah. That's what literally happened with the Silly Millimeter.
Yeah, no, I figure out a great ending, a great climax and a great ending, and then I sit down and I write up to get to that ending. And that has stood me very well. And I, you know, I tease some people when we talk about writing. You know, they say, "Hey, I just had a great idea about a story that I want to do," and I go, "Okay, so what's the ending? Do you know?" Or no, I don't ask what the ending is. I say, "Do you know what your ending is?"
Exactly.
And they go, "No, I really don't. You know, I just like this character that I'm creating, and I'm got to figure out a story and et cetera, et cetera." And to me, that's just foreign to me conceptually.
I agree. I at the very least, I have the climax in mind, if not the actual ending.
Yeah.
The climatic scene.
And I don't know if this would work for you, but I figured out a way to write and successfully finish things in a reasonable amount of time, and that's I treat writing as a part-time job. So when I'm in full-on writing mode, I'll generally, you know, at 10 p.m., I'll stop what I'm doing, get in front of the computer, and start writing till about 1 or 2 in the morning. And I do that every day until I'm done. And, you know, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that I figured out a way that worked well for me. And so I can do, you know, 225,000 word books in 5 to 6 months.
And my motivation is the writers groups that I'm in. Oh, I'm up next week.
Push you?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
I'm up next week. Yeah, I better have, you know, 30 pages for this group, or they're going to kick my butt, you know. I think part of it is that I have a tendency to work on different things all at the same time too. I mean, there's actually a detective story I've been playing around with that I've written parts of because that's what hit me that night, and I've got a chapter of that written that may or may not see the light of day. It's actually a detective story based on a radio drama that I did in 1978. I did
wow.
It was a I think you might appreciate this. It was going to be a series of comic detective radio dramas, and I only produced 2. One was entitled The Alphabet Mugger. It takes place in Uptown, and the other was entitled Murder on the Evanston Express.
Okay.
Now I wrote a third one that didn't get produced, but I've got a friend who may actually put it together. It's entitled Death at the Salad Bar, and it, I have a sort of a Jacques Clouseau, James Bond, Columbo character. It's kind of weird.
Okay.
So I, as much as I love sci-fi, I will dip my fingers into other things.
Yeah, but I mean I think that comes from a fertile imagination. I mean, not everything I write is science fiction. I do some irony. I do religious irony pretty well. I've even had one of my short stories converted to a screenplay and filmed. But I do envy you being able to work on multiple things at one time. I don't think I can do that very well.
Well, I didn't say I did it very well.
But at least, I mean, it sounds like you have like a really laid back style, and you do get it done. So I mean, that's there's nothing. I don't see anything not to recommend that.
But it took me 65 years.
Yeah, but you know what? Here's the thing. You know what it is about getting old that I think is the coolest ass thing about getting old?
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is you learn to pick your battles. Not everything is a fight to death.
This is
and
very
the other
true.
thing is you don't have to engage every single second of every single day. You can actually step back a couple steps, sit on the couch, watch things go by, and think them through before deciding what to do.
It's amazing. I do computer tech support, and I work with a team of 2 other people. And they're both younger than I am, and I'm constantly teaching this. Something will happen, and they'll freak out, and I'm going, what's the big deal? And I'll call the guy and joke with him, laugh with him, and everything is happy. You just, I don't know. Your point is well taken. Life is short.
And the other thing, now that you've said that, the other thing that I want to know is why are so many of us IT guys sci-fi writers, speculative fiction writers?
I'm only doing IT because that's what worked. I happen to like computers. If I had my druthers, I probably would have studied writing and would have tried to do this full time because I love it so much. But I mean, technology and science fiction, I mean, it sort of goes hand in hand in a lot of ways. I was talking about the iRobot series.
Right.
One of my favorite weird old time movies is Colossus, the Foreground Project. You remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
And Space Odyssey with Hal. Even though I don't buy some of that, and we went to see, my wife and I went to see AI with I forget the little kid's name, and there was a point at which things were happening and he was getting sad and crying, and I'm turning to her, she's tears in her eyes, and I'm saying,
right,
it's just a damn machine. I almost got killed because in my mind, there is no such thing or never will be a truly conscious, intelligent machine because as far as we know, it is only emulating us.
Right.
There's this theory that if something gets complicated enough, it becomes intelligent. Well, there's a whole lot of complicated things around that aren't very intelligent. And again, this is the God believer coming out in me again. There is an essence and a spark that goes beyond just the material. I had an idea for a story once where someone invents a teleportation device. And it works, except when you teleport something live, it comes out the other end dead because you cannot transport life source and consciousness. It is a totally different thing.
That's an interesting concept, and that'll be something that we talk about over lunch.
Sure.
Hang on a second. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the blacksci-fi.com website. If you're not a member, join, because we got more cool stuff than you can shake a stick at. This is for those of you who are listening to this as a podcast. This is the Friday, October 23rd, 2015 edition, and our special guest tonight is Steve Bellinger, who has written we're calling it an urban story, but it's a urban time travel novel called the CHRONOCAR.
Yeah.
And is that available? That I'm assuming, hopefully, that's available on Amazon
It's available everywhere. That's the neat thing about having a legitimate publisher. It's available everywhere online, and if you go to a bookstore and ask for it, they can order it. In fact, please go to the bookstores and ask for it, because if enough people ask, they'll put it on the shelves.
Yeah, I've been trying to do that too. It's tough getting bookshelf space.
Oh yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
But it does help that it's being provided by a publisher and goes through the proper distributor. So that's why Barbara's Bookstore is even considering it.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't even look at it if I were self-published.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I'm just saying.
No, you're absolutely right. No, because I found out all the reasons why. Overstocks, returns,
exactly,
things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My goal was to get it published legitimately. I was going to do it. Not legitimate is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Because I was going to resort to self-publishing if I couldn't find a publisher. Finding a publisher actually gave it more credibility in my mind. That's when I realized, I guess this is pretty good, that they think is worth the investment that they're going to make to put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it cost them thousands to put this thing together.
Oh, sure, of course. And then marketing is something where, that kind of money is not always available to the first-time writer or the early writer, the newbie.
Sure. Now, they don't do a whole lot of marketing. I mean, I'm doing a lot of that myself.
Well, yeah.
But the biggest reason I wanted to have it published by a publisher so I wouldn't have to pay for editing and all this, that, and the other. So, I mean, the book didn't cost me a penny, and I'll be getting my first check at the end of the month for the few books that have been sold. So,
I'm working on a story where machines don't necessarily become self-aware, which is something that we'll argue until it happens or until it doesn't. But if we get to the point where we can upload a human consciousness to a machine, then the story becomes different. And so that, all three of those possibilities give us some pretty good fodder for good stories if we're good writers.
Well, and I always thought that unless you're the consciousness, how do you know that is what really happened?
Well, you're right, but the fact that we look at people and they're walking, they're shopping, they're chewing gum, they got bad breath, they go through their life. Some of these people out here, I would, in a heartbeat, call them soulless individuals.
Oh yeah, I buy that.
Just because they have human form doesn't make them enlightened God's creations, if you want to, for lack of anything else to call it.
But mental problems notwithstanding, they're still self-aware. And how would we ever know if a machine is self-aware?
Well, there are people who are claiming that all of these self-driving cars exhibit. Well, they exhibit a stunted, though self-awareness. A stunted self-awareness.
But it's all algorithms. I had a dream the other night that I'm riding in a self-driving car. I'm going down the road, 80 miles an hour. Everything is great, and all of a sudden the screen turns blue, and the car goes off the road and kills me. it would be very
Well, that
hard
was
for
because,
me as a tech person to trust any computer with my life totally.
well, and the reason why for that, let me help you with your dream, is because your car was being run by a Microsoft operating system. Otherwise, the screen would not have turned blue.
No, it would have just gone blank.
Yeah, but
no,
I get you. I mean,
yeah.
somebody made a crack. Oh no, it was Bill Gates said something about something should be running Windows, and then it was about a car computer, and somebody from GM wrote about a 10-point thing where, yeah, you know, if we did put if Microsoft built a car like this, then, you know, we would have to deal with blue screens of death. You know, when your car acted up, you'd have to do the 3-finger salute and reboot it, and on and on and on and on. And you're absolutely right. I mean, as we look at things now, we don't have the capability to come anywhere near self-aware computers. But some of the programming from the early 80s, you know, the Lisp-based programming, the artificial intelligence-based programming, had the capacity to learn. And your point is well taken. But, you know, for those who don't believe that the Earth was built in 6 days and that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, it took us a long time to get to where we are now in terms of brain capacity, in terms of being able to do that. And of course the speculation is that once we have computers with an equal number of CPUs as we have neurons, there's a chance that could happen. But then, you know, we're talking really speculative stuff, and I think that's the cool part of dealing with those issues, because that's where the stories come from. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you a secret. One of the reasons why I approach it that way, and this may surprise you, I did go to IIT, but I majored in psychology. And I studied neuropsychology. I just don't. I read an article by a neurosurgeon once who said the deeper he dug into the workings of the brain, the more he believed in God. Because some of that stuff doesn't make sense. That happens.
Well, that is okay.
You know, now, again, maybe complexity is the secret, and I'll be the first one to admit if you prove it wrong. It's just, I don't know. There's more to it than just putting a lot of parts together and putting a lot of transistors.
I'm not trying to proselytize for the fact that, you know, artificial intelligence is on the horizon. I mean, we don't know. You know, we have such poor. Okay, we've got an IBM computer now that can beat anybody in chess,
right?
Including the big chess masters. And but that's not thinking. You're right. That's algorithms. And so computers can outstrip us in all kinds of ways. You know, in terms of the calculations they can do, the programming that they exhibit, even some of the judgments for those that have a little bit more artificial intelligence-like programming. But I think that until, and it's funny because you and I have probably comparable degrees, and I like the what if, and that's what drew me to science fiction in the first place. I love the what if, you know. I looked at what was that, I, Robot with Will Smith, and I could see the basis for Isaac Asimov's work in the root of that. But then again, you know, you have such tragically flawed humans in order to drive a story forward, that and ascribing human characteristics to robots or computers. I agree, and I entirely agree with you. It is artifice. It is storytelling artifice to do that.
Well, one of the central themes in the CHRONOCAR, if I can, a little bit without giving it much away, you know, the guy goes back to the year 1919, and he meets the daughter of this son of a slave, you know. And she asks him, in fact, my wife actually reads a section from this chapter, and she asks him, well, what is the future like? Because she's imagining flying cars and no diseases and things like that. Well, even though that might actually be possible, it hasn't happened. A good example, I worked for a company called SpectraVision years ago. They were the first to put pay-per-view movies and TV in hotel rooms.
Okay.
And they designed an excellent cable box. But then somewhere along the way, a bean cutter counter decided we can get this part cheaper if we buy it from there. And just because the numbers are the same did not mean that part met spec. So they put out several pieces of junk that didn't work right. You know, those are the kinds of things that worry me. You know, it may be possible to build a self-driving car that I can trust, but then I want to know the guy who actually built that model.
Well, and let's be honest, anything that they build like that, if it's built by industry, by consumer industry, is going to be built by the lowest bidder.
Exactly. I remember an astronaut saying, sitting on the top of the space shuttle, he looks to the other one and says, you know, this thing was built by the lowest bidder.
Yes.
You know, and that is something to consider, the economics of it. That's why the things that we saw in 2001 never happened. We can't afford to put a hotel in orbit. If we could, it would be there. The technology exists. There's very little in that movie that we couldn't do.
That is true.
You know, but can we afford it? You know,
and
we could have had a man on Mars years ago. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. I was about to say that you know, we always have the calculation being made today. Well, what's the return going to be?
Exactly.
You know, and which is really stupid, because when you think about the untold discoveries, the untold research, the untold science, that the space program has brought back and given us, you know, people don't listen to that. People don't understand that, you know. And people, when you look at your cell phone, that is that's more computing power than existed in the entire United States of America in one Samsung Galaxy 5.
Exactly.
Okay, so when they were putting together the entire NASA program, you had dumbass computers doing a little bit of accounting, and then you had the NASA computers doing simulations and orbital calculations. And one Galaxy S5 is more computing power than NASA had the entire time they sent a man to the moon. And so you think, well, what's going to come ahead? Well, I think because of how people are getting stupider and how they are so hooked to their phone, their social networking and things like that, I think we'll see more man-machine hybrids before we see anything that smacks of artificial intelligence.
Interesting. Yeah. I think I can see that. And I can see people standing in line volunteering to have that done.
Oh, come on. Are you kidding? You got probably 20 million people in this country right now who, if they thought they could get on Facebook just by thinking about it and looking at, you know, their glasses or whatever, they'd be lining up. They'd be beating each other's ass in line.
That's true.
You know, to get to that point.
I mean, they're doing it now for a pair of gym shoes, right? Tomorrow morning the store's going to open.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's the Nike, the Michael Jordan store. The Jordan store here. Yeah. Yeah. Suck it, the rest of the United States of America. We've got it here, and we've got it first.
And we got people who waited in line for 4 days to go in there and buy their first pair of gym shoes. It's like I think I embarrassed some friends at work. They were all excited over getting tickets to Star Wars and this, that, and the other. And my point is, well, the film is going to be exactly the same in 6 months, isn't it? There's some things that, to me, aren't worth it. You know, a one-time concert, a championship game to pay a lot of money, I can kind of see that. But to go see a movie, to go buy a pair of tennis shoes, doesn't work for me.
Well, I kind of feel the same way about a phone, you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The only reason I own a smartphone is because they gave me one at work.
Yeah. I have one because I have tools for the IT industry that are very handy, having that in my pocket.
Exactly.
But again, it comes down to use, not artifice, not some emotional need or anything like that. And you know, I think that the ubiquity of the dumbing down of America is something that is a very attractive circumstance for, for political reasons and especially for consumer reasons. Because, let's face it, a phone is a pretty undifferentiated product, but you get people who will swear up and down one's better than the other. You have people who will fight for them or even kill for them. So it's kind of, it's tough looking at the world today. And then the other thing that really bothers me, I don't know if you thought about this at all, but I think about the fact that I decided to write and to become a writer right at the leading edge of the reduction of people who read recreationally.
That's interesting, because one of the things about my story that concerned me is not very long.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's actually turned out to be an advantage. I think people are more likely to pick up a thinner book than a thick one. And I hate to think of it that way, but because again, I was concerned that who's going to want to pay $12 for a book that's only that thick when for $1 more this book is $3. But I really think that people see that, I can read that in a week, and it appeals to them. An unintentional advantage.
Yeah. I'm thinking the salvation of my trilogy is if it gets picked up as either movies or a miniseries.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't write it specifically to make money, and I don't know about you, but I would say since 2001, all of the writers and the predominantly black writers that I met in Chicago, their plan for writing success was they were going to write their book and they were going to give it to Oprah, and she was going to put it on her show.
Yeah.
And put it in her, and that was their business model. You laugh.
Yeah.
But
yeah. No.
I don't.
No, I get it. I mean, that's my dream, but it's not my business model. I mean, one of the things that I have to prevent myself from doing is giving the dumb things away to people because I want them to read it.
Right.
But I can't do that because they cost me money.
Right.
There it is.
Yeah, and the one really nice black-owned bookstore here in Chicago. Well, actually, it was out in Lincoln Square at Lincoln Square Mall. It was Easy Books. It closed, and it was too bad because Kevin had a really good store, and he was going to put in a section just for BSFS people. And the mall was he was going to do that.
Great. Yeah.
And I moved his store twice. He opened up a second store out in the western suburbs. They gave him a great deal for this mall out in the western suburbs, but he just wasn't selling enough to justify it. And the Lincoln Mall is, it's almost as bad as the mall that they had in the Blues Brothers where they drove through.
Yeah.
And that was really too bad. They sold it. They had all kinds of problems in terms of the very things that you wrote about in your short story, in terms of code and things like that, and upkeep.
Yeah.
And so he's stuck in a place where he, for him to move again would have been, even though he got us to help him for essentially free, you still have to make money, and it's tough for the independents. And I think that book sales, location is a big damn deal.
Absolutely.
When I was growing up, Hyde Park had the most bookstores per capita of any place in the United States of America, and that has changed. They still have more than most neighborhoods, but again, I think that the issue is that the challenge for most of us who are newer writers, smaller writers, not pushed by a big publishing company, is the marketing aspect. And I want to talk to you about that. This kind of falls into what I've classified as the 80-20 rule, where 20% of your time and your effort is spent in the service of your creativity, and the 80% is spent in service of the business of doing business. How has that broken out for you?
That's very true, because I will find myself spending a lot of time on Facebook, like when we agreed to do this program. Now I'm on Facebook sharing it everywhere and tweeting it everywhere and things like that, so that the world will know that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do web development as a sideline. Now maintaining my site is a full-time job because right now it announces this program. When we get off the air, I've got to change that to say, now go listen to the podcast. I mean, yeah,
right.
it can be a lot of work because it has to be up to date or people will never come back.
That is true. And what kind of response do you get in social networking? Because there's a lot of people who find that to be one of the most valuable channels for them to market their wares.
It's hard to tell because I get like, but does that turn into sales? It's hard to tell.
Right.
Everybody loves the CHRONOCAR, but nobody's read it. You know what I mean? Well, it's a great idea. Where can you buy it? And then you don't buy it because there is so much competition. I've joined some websites that promote books, but in many cases, mine is the only sci-fi. Mine is the only one that's not romance/erotica. So that doesn't work.
Did you put any sex in yours?
No, not in this one. There's some in the next one.
Yeah.
No, yeah. But this one was clean on purpose because I wanted to reach a potentially younger audience, and I didn't want that to distract from the story. Now, in the thing that I'm writing next, like I say, it is a love story, so there is actually a place for that. There's a reason for that stuff when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so. And there's a young lady who's in one of my groups who does an excellent job of writing romance erotica, and she does it great because the stories are good. She drops in a little bit of erotica, but the story is great, and that's what I love about it. As opposed to some where, some of it, the story is just an excuse to toss them in bed again,
Yeah. I was just about to say that. A lot of people use that, like Michael Bay uses explosions.
Yes, exactly.
It's like it's almost like punctuation. When I read the first book, Discovery, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I'd never written a book before, so I put a lot of kitchen sink kind of stuff in there. Mm-hmm. And there is a love story in there, and there's a scene which makes it a little difficult to do that young adult thing. Mm-hmm. But having said that, it's funny that you said what you said because I get more feedback from women who have read the book than I do from men.
Interesting.
And, I don't know exactly how to exploit that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
What are they getting out of it? Is it just the romance part of it, or do they really get into the rest of the story? That's the thing.
They, believe it or not, they actually talk about the story. There's many issues in there, but there's the fact that when the country finds out it's African Americans who have managed to do something that no one else has ever done, there's that part. Mm-hmm. Then, there's in the course of the investigation of figuring out what's going on around the world, you have a white detective and a black school administrator who enjoy each other's company. And really, that's how it starts out. That's how it mostly always starts out. When you meet somebody and you have an affinity for them, it's because they're interesting to you. If you're a mature person, I don't mean mature like years, but if you understand what relationships are all about and what it is that's going to feed your soul, when you meet somebody with that kind of affinity, things progress, or they don't, either way. So that was interesting for me to put in there because I don't want to give away too much, but there's a big utility in those people having the relationship they have in terms of driving the story forward.
Well, there you go, and that's important.
Yeah, and I when it came time for that inevitable scene, it made sense as far as the story went, which is what a lot of women's feedback tells me. They say, we like the relationship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a good thing. But I'm not going to see it in elementary schools and maybe not too many high schools. Well,
this is true.
we'll have to see. I mean, they're using it in colleges, which is good. But had I been as smart as you, I might have left it out. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not sure if I was doing it because, there is some language in it. I mean, I dropped a couple of F-bombs, and
right.
I was even apologizing about that with my friends at church and saying, people use that stuff all the time. It's part of the language now. Because I have a friend at work who was sharing the book with his high school daughter to take it to the school, and I was saying, but the language, they use that language all the time. Let them read the story.
Yeah.
And
you
that
know
may be
what?
unfortunate.
At the high school level, they've also, it's so funny. I take care of a school on the west side, and I'm telling you, we've had a 24 string of emails because a couple of the elementary school age girls fired up one of the iPads, and normally they have parental controls, but something happened because apparently they saw something, and this is an issue that we have to deal with.
Can I ask what school it is on the west side?
Oh, Holy Family School. You know where the Sears Sears catalog? Okay, and you know that Sears Tower, the old Sears Tower there, the 14-story building?
Yeah, the old Sears Tower.
It was the original Sears Tower. Mm-hmm. Holy Family School is just to the west of that tower by about 60 feet.
I got you.
So it's an elementary school, preschool through 8, and my book is not appropriate for them at all. But for high school, maybe not so much because kids find sexual content and know about those things, and I didn't treat it sleazy like Dear Penthouse. I never thought this would happen to me until the pizza lady showed up. Nothing really stupid like that. But this was a good relationship. So, had I been thinking ahead, okay, maybe it would have worked out. Maybe it wouldn't have worked out to have not matured their relationship. But all of these things, again, are in the service of trying to tell a good story, which is what I think we all try to do.
Well, I think part of where mine came from is, again, I did radio for so long.
Right.
And radio, by definition, should be, PG-13.
Sure.
In fact, if I could steer the conversation a little differently before I forget, I've got a special event coming up next Tuesday that is radio related. There's a website called Sonic Society, and they specialize in radio drama, and they are playing a thing that I did 30 years ago entitled The Day of the Martians. The Day of the Martians is a readaptation of War of the Worlds, where the Martians land in Elgin and storm Michigan Avenue. And everybody loves it. I just want to make sure I get that mentioned out there.
All right, do me a favor. Log on and put that on the events calendar at BSFF.
Okay, I will do that. Okay,
because that way, since we've mentioned this, people who are either listening now or people who check it out as a podcast will know to go there to look and get the details. That's great, man. That sounds great.
So that's just one of the things that I've been doing.
So when you say you've done a lot of radio, were you a radio personality?
Well, only in college. And beyond that, in my own mind. But when everybody was trying to make the epic film, I was able to do that on radio using just the stuff I had at home.
Right.
There were some film students at IIT, and they wanted to make their equivalent of like a Star Wars. It would have cost them a fortune because they didn't have the computer technology back then.
Right.
I burned down Chicago all in my studio apartment using special effects and good actors.
That is great. It's not Friday between 8 and 10, is it?
No, it's Tuesday. It's going to be podcasted also. It's Tuesday at 8 o'clock is when it's going to come out, but it'll be a podcast also.
Yeah, I want to tune into that. That sounds like an awful lot of fun, especially messing up, Michigan Avenue.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
My social activism in that area is if we ever have, race riots in Chicago again, I'm going to be busing people to the northern suburbs so that they don't have to burn their own homes. But that's the anarchist in me.
No, you were. Okay, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well,
no,
I was going
to
say you were talking about the race riots, and it reminded me. You asked me earlier about the research that I had done for the CHRONOCAR.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's where a lot of the action takes place in the year 1919.
Right.
And I spent hours in the library because, on the internet you can only get so much. The library you can actually read the newspaper accounts and things like that.
Sure.
And I did a lot of walking around in Bronzeville and scoping out these neighborhoods, and that was a lot of work, but it was just so much fun. And I discovered some surprising things. I won't give away the best surprises, but one of the things that my character, when he goes back to 1919, sees that blows his mind is the elevator. People don't realize how long the damn thing's been around.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to the young lady, the doctor's daughter, being so disappointed with his future because you can't do any better than the elevator after 100 years.
Well, didn't he tell her? He should have told her about escalators.
Well, see, I'll put it to you this way. In the story, they actually ride an escalator that existed.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I
didn't know they were that old. I honestly didn't know that they were that old. I thought the elevator was a little bit younger, or the escalator was a little. But I don't know.
The research that I did turned up some surprising things that were around back then that they're not there anymore, so people don't think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is apropos. This is a great time, with all of the brouhaha about Back to the Future, and does 2015 live up to what was in the movie and things like that, and sometimes you get people thinking a little bit broader when it's brought to them that way. And for most people, common culture, Back to the Future is about the only time travel thing that they really know about. I mean, I remember I forget what year it was. I'll have to go look it up. But the TV show, The Time Tunnel.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was in the 60s sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and then here in Chicago, we had this show called Garfield Goose in the afternoon. I don't know if it was syndicated, if it went anyplace else. But remember they had Journey to the Beginning of Time?
Yes. Well, I remember
that serial that they ran, yeah. So, people, when it's in common culture, they see it. They see it, they remember it, but it's not always scientifically accurate, especially for a hard science guy like you. But
that's why I was afraid that the CHRONOCAR wouldn't make it, because I tried to avoid, they're so, I'm remembering a scene in Back to the Future when he's looking at the picture and people are disappearing because of things that he's done. None of that is logical to me. One of my favorite movies is The Time Machine, Rod Taylor.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And, he's sitting in a time machine and he is sitting there and he's watching the seasons pass and his house burn down and whatever. But in my mind, if you're traveling through time, are you necessarily traveling through space the same way? Do you follow where I'm coming from?
Oh, absolutely. The biggest paradox, or the biggest inaccuracy that has to do with time travel is, let's say you and I jump back 6 months. We're going to effectively be in outer space.
Exactly.
We're going to be in a vacuum.
Because between the rotation of the Earth and the orbits, we're spiraling through space at a zillion miles an hour. 19,000,
I think.
Well, the galaxy is moving like 600 miles a second. And
I meant just in our, just locally though. Yeah, so, I get you. Yeah.
And if you think about it, we are spiraling through space like that. Well, without giving anything away, I addressed that issue in the CHRONOCAR.
Well, I would expect nothing less from an empiricist, a scientifically hard science guy. I didn't want to ask you had you not addressed it, but I think that's pretty cool.
Well, there is actually, and this is not giving away too much, and again, this is one of the things that scared me, because, through the story, the things happen, and you get involved with how time travel affects things. And in the end, I actually have a short article written by the doctor explaining the theory of time travel. But I guess I did it right by putting it as an epilogue, because people who weren't interested, they don't read it. Those that are, they do.
Right.
And I had a friend at work read that, and she sat down. Is all of that real? No, I made it all up. I mean, the whole idea behind science, what learned this from Asimov, you start with a little real science, and then you take off from there. I referenced the third law of thermodynamics. That's a real thing. But then what I do after that, I totally made up. I had a young man in one of my critique groups, very bright young man. I had them critique that, and he came in. He was genuinely upset because none of this is real. And we're reminding him, well, it is science fiction. Yeah, but people are going to believe it. And I'm saying, well, I hope so, as long as they buy the book. But when you talk about the dumbing down of people, there is that fear that people will read that and think that what I've written is fact.
Is this a real story?
Pardon me?
Is this a real story?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I said, I hear that. Yeah.
It's exactly what you're hearing.
Yeah.
And as hilarious as that is, I can believe it. I can believe that people are asking you that. So keep writing. Let them buy it. Let them believe it or not believe it. As long as they buy the book and enjoy it, fine.
Yeah, and like I said, if it does get adapted to either the small or the big screen,
sure.
Of course that's going to drive book sales, but hopefully, enough of the essence of the story comes through to trigger, to induce that interest in that discussion that I hope would happen.
I do want to, because we're getting close to a wrap up here. I can't believe that it's almost 2 hours already.
Oh, I'm really good at this. I suck you in,
are.
and you have no idea how much time is going by.
Yeah, exactly. But I just want to encourage people to check out the CHRONOCAR and not to prejudge it as science fiction, because, it is. But another argument that I get into people is, like, what is science fiction?
Right.
And there was a definition that I think I got from Asimov where it says how in a science fiction story, the science fiction is so ingrained that if you took it away, the story would fall apart.
Yeah, it's the foundation. Sorry to use that word. It just came. It's the foundation of the plot of the arc.
And that means, as I've tried to explain to people, that Star Wars is not science fiction. No, it's not. It's space opera. You take you give them metal swords and horses, you've got King Arthur, pretty much.
Well,
Jedi Knight fighting an evil empire.
Roddenberry called Star Trek Wagon Train in Space. Exactly.
And a very interesting thing, I was watching Star Trek, the first movie. I loved it, and most people hated it, but there was more pure science fiction in that than there was in Wrath of Khan. Wrath of Khan was more space opera. And
that's true.
And after watching it for the first time in many years, I didn't realize that the special effects were by Douglas Trumbull, the same guy who did Space Odyssey. I should have known. One of my favorite movies.
Space Odyssey only has 2 scientific flaws in it. That's amazing.
Oh yeah.
The one is when he's slurping his food through his straw. When he lets go, the stuff goes back down the straw.
Right.
And the other one was they did not have the sophistication or the knowledge to make the gravity on the moon much lower. You could tell the astronauts were walking in 1G. But everything else, the instructions on that 0G toilet are priceless.
Yes,
exactly. Because they would work. They would work. Oh, and so I like 2001: A Space Odyssey because of its science. and because of its plausibility.
Exactly.
And you know what? Whether you believe in God or not, who's to say whether or not we were seeded or induced to advance or something by some other civilization? I will say this from both a religious and a scientific point of view, well, mostly from a religious point of view, that if we're the only life in this universe, God is one of the most wasteful creations ever.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that Arthur C. Clarke said that he wondered if MGM realized they had spent X millions of dollars on a religious film.
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was a quote, yes.
And, nobody, or let's put it this way, very few people look at that, especially the very ending where you have what looks like either a fetus or an infant looking back at the earth.
Right.
At that last shot, you have the monolith that could be loosely interpreted as God or whatever.
Sure.
It's interesting to see how all of that came together, because if I'm not mistaken, I think Arthur C. Clarke and whoever did the adaptation, the screenplay, were working almost at the same time to do the book and the movie.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know Kubrick himself had a lot to do with the screenplay, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the original ending, because in the beginning, those orbiting satellites were actually nuclear bombs.
Exactly, and they exploded.
Well, the original ending was to have the Star Child explode all of those bombs. He didn't do it because that's how he ended Dr. Strangelove.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's look ahead for you. Okay. You've got a couple other works that you're working on. One's, you said, more fantasy or horror.
Well, it's paranormal, but there is some science fiction involved,
okay.
Right?
Okay, and then and when you look at your creative arc, it sounds like you're predisposed to enjoy, speculative fiction, science fiction, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, as you're sitting here right now, about how many works do you think that you have coming out of you?
I don't know. 1,000.
Let's say. Well, no. I mean, let's say in the next 5 years. Let's say in the next 5 years. Kind of what else can we? Would there be a? I don't know how. I don't know how CHRONOCAR ends. Is there room in it for a sequel?
Absolutely. I've actually got a sequel partially written. But I didn't pursue it because I didn't want to put all that work into it if this thing bombed. Well, people are starting to ask, so at some point maybe it'll happen.
All right. So for you, would you consider your creative endeavors, more financially driven than maybe creatively?
No,
I don't ask out of any bad. I mean, there's no bad behind that question. Yeah.
I'm of the opinion that if I write a good story and people enjoy it, then it will naturally make money. But like I said, I have to resist the temptation to give the thing away because I just want people to read it. And the more they enjoy it, the more I want people to read it. So my motivation is to entertain. Hopefully that will bring in some, money as sort of a sideline,
No.
Yeah.
You didn't go for the Oprah model. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I would like to make it big. I mean, if Oprah picked it up and everybody loved it, then more people would read it and enjoy it. More people read and enjoy it, then I'll make a few more bucks. If I can get it in Spike Lee's hands, because he's due for a sci-fi epic, right?
No, he will not. No. I and 3 other people. Oh no, I didn't. But 3 other people had that discussion with Spike on my behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And he won't do sci-fi.
Oh, that's too bad. Well,
first of all, nobody's going to give him $100 million to do a movie.
Yeah, that's true. But
yeah,
I don't have. But I don't have to say it. I don't have spaceships and explosions. So what the hey?
Well, yeah. Somebody wrote in the chat room, "Do the right orbit."
Well, I will tell you this humorous thing. A friend of mine at work, when I explained the story of the CHRONOCAR to him, he went, it's the soul TARDIS.
Right.
So, big Doctor Who fan too. I didn't tell you about my fandom because we were talking about Space Odyssey, and I actually met Gary Lockwood a couple of times. At once at a Star Trek convention and another at a 2001 reunion thing they had here in Chicago. But anyway, you were saying.
I don't know. I just try to hang on by the end of my fingertips for this kind of stuff. But I'm a Doctor Who fan as well. I've been watching it for well over 40 years. And what are some of the other influences? You mentioned the golden age of science fiction and a couple authors, but I mean, what are the kinds of and you specifically mentioned Asimov, but what other influences did you have that kind of drove this along? Drove this interest along?
The interest, well, what it is now is that when I'm watching TV, it is generally documentaries. I watch the Science Channel more than the Sci-Fi Channel. I love Doctor Who, but I see all of the holes in the plot and all of the things that just don't make scientific sense. That's what drove the writing of the CHRONOCAR and being really kind of meticulous in the science of that story. I've gotten a number of compliments over how logical the science of time travel is in this story. I guess I need that to make it believable, and that's what makes it fun.
Well, nobody wants to read a story or watch a story where something is so egregious that it forces them to suspend disbelief.
Exactly. So, and again, I'm a hard sci-fi guy, and I just like for things, what would really happen if someone could travel through time? And that's what it's all about. And there is a glitch in the whole time travel concept that is key to the story that catches everybody by surprise, even though it's very logical. And that's as much as I can say about that without giving it away.
Oh, no, don't. But but this is kind of cool that you've decided that instead of going the fantasy route, or you decided that for you, science has to be genuine, and it has to be consistent, and it has to be realistic.
And much to my surprise, so does a lot of other people, or so do a lot of other people.
Well,
I was really not expecting it to do this well.
Yeah, I talked about, the things that I learned about writing, writing for the 3rd to 6th grade level. And I kind of screwed up my, I wrote it about the 9th grade level, but when you go out to someplace like Batavia or you have pretty smart people go through your story and they don't see something where they go, oh man, that's ridiculous. That would never happen, or that can't happen, or whatever. You can't go kill your grandfather, or maybe you can go kill your grandfather, in a time travel story, and then not have something consistent happen, something rational, So
which is an issue that I would deal with in the sequel if it gets written. I actually have an idea of how I might handle that.
Then the only thing, you mentioned that the only thing holding you back is how successful you perceive CHRONOCAR being, right?
Well, yeah, and because the other story is already going to be out there, and I'm going to start on a 3rd one, it might be the 4th thing. I don't know. If there's that much interest, I can put it together because, again, it is partially written, and I have a lot of it in mind.
And you spoke about, the support of your wife. Is she a collaborator in terms of maybe editing, or does she help you with story? How involved is she?
She's just another sci-fi fan. Part of what drew us together is the fact that she is as big a Trekkie as I am. We're going to be married 10 years a year from November.
Okay.
And we're going to renew our vows with a Star Trek wedding. I'm going to wear a full dress admiral's uniform, and she is going to wear a Klingon wedding dress.
Wow.
And
who's officiating? You've already got a church. That's right.
Yeah, they're already behind it. I don't know if it'll happen in the church itself, but they're already behind it, and everybody's looking forward to it.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
And that's what it is about her. She is a lot of fun, and that's what I love about her.
Well, I mean, and that's going to last you a long time too, because people underestimate the importance of fun.
Exactly.
So she's a fan, and then in terms of the mechanics of doing your book, you mentioned that what is it? It is that Barking Rain Press?
Yes, Barking Rain Press.
Do they provide the kinds of business services, things like editing?
We spent 2 months editing this thing. The young lady who did it is a genius because the proofreader came back and found no mistakes. The cover art is done by an award-winning sci-fi cover artist. I mean, they spent some money on it.
That's pretty cool. And they sound like do they work with just local people, or are they? Would you recommend them?
They're on the West Coast. They're out of Portland, Oregon, I think, or no, Washington, Seattle area, I believe.
Okay.
And I'm sure she's listening, and she's going to kill me if I get it wrong.
Well, we've mentioned them a few times.
Yes.
And somebody did put up their link in the chat room, and it's www.barkingrainpress, and it's RAIN.
Right.
barkingrainpress.org.
Exactly.
For those who are listening, check them out.
Some good books. Their second real sci-fi writer, I read her work, and it's excellent. I think it's excellent.
Well, I'm getting sick of my fulfillment people, so I'm going to actually do an inquiry and see what they have to offer to an old guy like me.
Hey, you never know.
Yeah, that's true. So in the process of getting this done, in the process of getting this first book out, what was the most surprising part for you about publishing a novel?
Well, I submitted my 3 chapters, and they liked it and said, please submit the rest. And the first time I got a rejection notice that was like a very long email because they saw the potential and actually made some suggestions, one of which was to join a writer's group, a critique group.
Right.
And a year of that stuff, I resubmitted it, they took it and ran with it. I can't overestimate the power of having a critique group, other people to look at it and see the obvious things that you miss. They will read it and they'll say, this should be here, that should be there, and I walk out thinking, you know what you're talking about. Then I go home and look at it and say, damn, they're right.
Yeah, but you know what? There's a lot of people who can't do that for themselves. There's a lot of people who are a little. I think it's probably something along the lines of egocentric, where it's difficult for them to hear critique from somebody else. And I was that
way too. I had to break that barrier to get this thing out there. Again, it's because Donna was after me. You really need to get this out there. So I swallowed my pride and realized, some of the things that people suggested are just so plain obvious. There are lines in there that folks love that came from someone else's suggestion. Put this here instead of there. And the next story, if it's any good, it'll be because of my fellow writers who've helped me to clean it up and make it worth submitting.
Wow.
So one of the things that people can look forward to, my daughter brought home a self-published book from a friend of hers, and I didn't get past page 2 with all the grammatical errors. So anyone who buys the CHRONOCAR, rest assured, grammar is good, spelling is good, it's readable.
There you go. And the other thing is, let's go. The other thing I want to ask you is, in terms of getting the book published, did you have a disappointment that you can think about? Excuse me, about the process that sticks out. Kind of like a pitfall that an early writer might be tripped up in. What would be your advice to somebody like that?
Well, you have to be careful because I approached one publisher who, and it may have been me. It wasn't clear that they were a vanity press. They read it, they loved it. Let's go. Now we need you to send us. Oh, wait a minute. I thought, and then at first I thought, well, it's not much they're asking for. Maybe that's the way to go. And then the price kept going up and up. And I said, forget it. If I got to do it myself, I'll just do it myself.
Right.
My wife has a book called "You Lost Me at Hello." It's a book about network marketing, and it's, and we published that totally ourselves. She wrote it, I edited it, and it's out there. People can buy it right now.
Sure.
That's also extremely popular. That's on Amazon also. So it can be done, but I wanted a product that was clean, well done, and worth the $12.95 that people are paying for it.
Right.
And so far, no one's ever quibbled about having to pay that for it. Well, the ebook is only half as much.
Well, yeah.
So I have to admit, I am actually quite proud of it. I'm very proud of it. It came out beautifully.
I think that the positive feedback that you get is probably one of the main drivers of pushing you forward to keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, exactly. Those who have read it love it, and they're not all people that I know.
Right.
And that is my one request. Anyone who reads the book and enjoys it, please, two things: tell others and write a review somewhere. That's what gets it around.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to get them to do that, but when they do, it definitely makes a difference.
Exactly.
We've got about 3 minutes to go here. Is there anything else you want to mention other than the fact that everybody should go and check out Steve's posts in the events calendar so you can see what he's doing? Oh, let me ask you this. Have you been to any sci-fi conventions or anything like that, to meet with others or promote your work?
Well, actually, we were at the Motor City Black Science Fiction Convention in Detroit a couple of weeks ago, and I sold a few books. And, I've signed up for others. I'm waiting to find out or whatever. But what I'd like to do in the last couple of minutes here, there's a couple of appearances I'm going to be doing at the Chicago Book Expo at Columbia College, 1104 South Wabash, on November 21st. Well, that's the big book expo, and I'm going to be there for about an hour from 11 to 12. And then later that same day, I'm going to be at Barbara's Bookstore in Burr Ridge, which is 810 Village Center Road. I'll put that in the calendar also. And I'll be signing books.
Cool.
And
I'll go ahead and buy it and then have you inscribe it.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I'm more than happy to.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, I want to encourage people to read it and enjoy it, and tell me about it. It's my life's work. I've poured my heart into this thing, and much to my surprise and to my pleasure, people really seem to enjoy it.
That's very cool, Steve.
So walk into bookstores and ask for it, and I'll put it on the shelves. It's funny. I was at Books A Million downtown, because I'm always looking to see if maybe they might do it, and they've got a section on sci-fi, and they have a section on urban literature. Black urban literature, and I've often wondered where they'd put it.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It would be very interesting to see where they would put it if they actually put it on the shelves.
Man.
Well,
look, we got a minute to go here before Jarvis comes in and takes us home, but I want to thank you for being here, and if you'll hang on right after the show recording ends, if anybody has any last questions, we'll cover those then, if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. And did it feel like 2 hours?
No, it did not. I thought I'd have a cauliflower ear by now, but I don't.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who listened live. Excuse me. I want to thank everybody who picks this up as a podcast, and remind people that every Friday night, or just about every single Friday night, we do this show. We have a special guest, and that we are always looking for not only people to participate who are creatives, but people to come and listen to the show and even participate. So thanks for everybody there. I'm looking to see if Jarvis is around. He usually comes and closes out the show. There he is. Okay, so Jarvis, take it away.
Hello?
Yes?
All right. I just want to make it really brief tonight because I had to get up super early. But, Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your product with us and letting us know your process. And because everybody's process is different, I love to hear different ways that people come up with their books and their ideas.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Fantastic. And always thanks, Will, for making it entertaining and keeping us engaged. And everybody that's participated in this, whether you like the post, whether you shared the post or tuned in, it's all appreciated. And we'll continue to support you and your endeavors. Please share what we're doing with other people. And thank everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And we're going to shut it off now. And love, peace, and hair grease.
Yeah.
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 Love, peace, and hair grease.